Sweet! Now that you're the master of all things layers, it's time to move on to the next exciting topic, and that is how to apply and work with effects. Adobe After Effects actually comes with a pretty large list of inbuilt effects, and these range from very simple color adjustments to distortions, artistic looks, or generating gradients, textures, or particle effects. So, in order to get our hands onto the fun, let's jump into Adobe After Effects and do as the name suggests, which is to apply some effects.
Welcome back to After Effects, and it's time to have some fun. Let's look at applying some effects to our layers. For that, in my Space Dance composition, let's select the Water Dance layer at the very bottom, and over on the left hand side, let me just quickly introduce you to one more layer switch. You'll find this little dot here, and this is a solo switch. So let's enable the solo switch on the Water Dance layer. This is going to temporarily hide all of the other layers. And again, if I was to export this composition now, all I would get would be this Water Dance layer. So to make sure you disable the solo mode before you export your composition. So let's enable solo mode, and let's apply some effects to this Water Dance layer. You will find all of the effects available in Adobe After Effects over on the right hand side in your Effects and Presets panel. And as I mentioned before, if you can't see this Effects and Presets panel, it might either be hidden behind some other tabs, and also make sure that in your window you have it actually enabled, otherwise you may not be able to find it. So let's go into the Effects and Presets panel. Let's make this just a little bit bigger. And you can either browse through all of these categories. So for example, you can expand color correction. You'll find a whole bunch of effects for color correction in here, distortion effects, generation effects. Now I do have a bunch of installed plugins for Ignite and Magic Bullet and a few other ones that you may not see, but you should still have a pretty large amount of inbuilt effects for Adobe After Effects. And if you don't want to browse through all of this because it gets a little bit messy, you can simply come up into the search bar at the top and search for, let's search for blob. And under the distortion category, you should see a CC blob eyes effect. And if you're using a really old version of After Effects and you don't have some of these effects, just use any other one to follow along. It doesn't really matter. It's really just around the basics of how to work with effects. And in order to apply this effect to the layer, you have two options. For one, you can simply select the effect and drag it either onto the layer in your preview window, and it's selected the Water Dance clip here. So if I let go, I can apply it to this layer. Or you can keep dragging it into your layer window directly onto the Water Dance layer. Personally, I prefer doing it this way because sometimes you may have other layers in your preview window and accidentally apply it to the wrong thing. So let's drag it into the layer window over our Water Dance layer and let go. And there you go, Walter looks a little bit different. If you now scrub through your composition, you can see that Walter has been, well, blobalized. If you play this back, you may notice that preview has gotten just a little bit slower, and that is because once you start applying effects to your layers, rendering will get a little bit slower in Adobe After Effects. It's just one of those facts in life unless you have an absolute monster of a computer. The other thing that you may notice is that our project panel on the left hand side has switched over to the effect controls. This tab actually lives in parallel to your project tab, so I can still see my project here and I can click into it and go back to my project panel. But over on the right hand side, I've got the effects controls, and right now this is showing me the effect controls for my Water Dance layer. So this is showing me all of the effects that are applied to my currently selected layer. If I select a different layer, let's select Venus for example, my effects controls panel is empty because we haven't applied any effects to the Venus layer. So let's reselect the Water Dance layer, come into the effect controls panel, and as always, if you can't find it, make sure you have it enabled under Window, Effect Controls, so make sure that is enabled for you. Let's come into this Effects Controls panel, select the CC Blobalize effect, and let's just delete it. That was fun, but we didn't really get very far. Actually, I just want to show you the other way to apply effects to your layer. So make sure the Water Dance layer is selected, and this is very important because you can also come up into the Effects and Presets panel and simply double click the effect and it'll apply it to your currently selected layer. So let's double click CC Blobalize, and that will apply the effect to the Water Dance layer. And in the effects controls for the Water Dance layer, you can now see the settings for the CC Blobalize effect. Every effect in Adobe After Effects is likely going to come with its own set of settings. So right now we have different settings for blobbiness. Let's expand this tab, and in here you'll find a whole bunch of different options. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail. You can simply come in here, kind of tweak them. So let's bring down the softness a little bit maybe. Or maybe we'll push it up a little bit actually, just so it normalizes just a little bit. So it makes Walter just look a little bit more human, but very wonky. And again, I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can open up all of these tabs and play with the settings and tweak your effects in any way that you want. Let's rewind a little bit and play this back. Remember, by pressing space on your keyboard. And that looks pretty nice and wacky. Let's return to the Effects Controls panel, and you can either delete the CC Blobberize effect, but sometimes you also just want to disable them. And for that, on the left side, you'll find this little FX icon. You click on that to essentially temporarily disable this effect on the layer. And I use this a whole lot because I temporarily just want to disable an effect without actually deleting it, because deleting it would lose me all of these settings. So let's just keep it disabled and let's collapse it again so we don't actually need to see all of these settings. Let's come back into the Effects and Presets panel and let's search for the cartoon effect. Under Stylize, you should find a cartoon effect. This time I'm going to click and drag this cartoon effect right onto my preview window and onto the Walter dance layer within that. So let's let go. And this is essentially going to give our footage a cartoony look. Again, in the Effects Controls panel, in the cartoon effect, there's a whole bunch of different settings that we can tweak for. We can lower the shading step so it gets a little bit flatter. We can expand the edge options, and in here, maybe let's jack up the width a little bit so the lines get a little bit thicker. Maybe we'll increase the threshold as well so there'll be a few more lines around Walter. Again, I'm not really trying to explain how the cartoon effect looks, just that it is available and how to tweak all of these settings. So now if you scrub through, you essentially have a cartoon version of Walter dancing. Let's again disable this effect and collapse it, and maybe we'll do one more just for fun. Let's search for the CC plastic effect and let's apply it to our layer simply by double clicking. And remember, we can double click this as long as we have our Walter dance layer selected. So let's just double click this effect. And it's essentially going to make Walter look like he's wrapped in bubble wrap. Now, if you wanted to, you can always return to your effect controls and re-enable the cartoon effect. For example, apply the cartoon effect or maybe even the CC Blobberize. And the order of these effects matters. Adobe After Effects will apply these effects in order top to bottom. So it will first apply a CC Blobberize effect, then a cartoon effect, and then the CC plastic effect. The reason that is important is because your image might look quite different depending on the order of your effects. For example, if I drag this CC Blobberize effect down to the bottom, my image changed. Not massively, but it did change because now the Blobberize effect is actually applied after my image has been cartoonified and after it's been plastic wrapped. So just keep that in mind. The order of your effects is actually very important. Now let's move on to something different, and for that let's delete the CC Blobberize effect and the CC plastic effect, because I believe that the CC indicates it is only available in Adobe After Effects CC and above. So let's just delete those. The cartoon effect, I believe you should have in older versions of Adobe After Effects as well. And let's come down into our layer window and unsolder this Walter dance layer. Now we have all of our planets again, as well as this yellow tint, and we can scrub through our composition, and that's looking pretty funky. Now, the next thing, I kind of want to make Venus glow. I know it's a planet and it doesn't actually glow because it's not the sun, but, you know, let's just do it for the fun of it. Let's come into the Effects and Presets panel and let's search for the glow effect. If you see a whole bunch of stuff in here, you may just have to scroll down a little bit, and under Stylize, you should find the glow effect. And I can't double click this now because I have my Walter dance layer selected, so in order to apply it to my Venus layer, I need to grab it, drag it, and I can't drop it in my preview window because that is actually going to select me my yellow solid, which is on top of my Venus layer. So down here, you'll see this yellow solid. It's on top of everything. So I can't actually drop this effect onto any of the planets below because the only thing I can select right now is this yellow solid that spans the entire area of my composition. So in order to apply this effect to the Venus layer, let's come into the timeline window and drop it on our Venus layer. So there you go. We now made Venus glow. In the effects controls, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower the threshold a little bit so more of Venus is going to glow. I'm going to increase the radius a little bit as well. Maybe I'll jack up the intensity. Now, just quickly, one of the things you probably want to do whenever you're dealing with gradients or glow or any smooth type of effects, return to your project panel up on the left-hand side. And at the bottom of the project panel, you find this little number here, 8BPC. That means your composition or your project is currently set to 8 bits per channel. This is the number of colors available to Adobe After Effects. And what you want to do when you're working with gradients and smooth things and glow, hold down Alt on your keyboard or Option if you're on a Mac and click this once to turn it to 16 bits per channel. And let's click it one more time to turn this to 32 bits per channel. This is just going to make sure that gradients and glows are nice and smooth and there's plenty of colors available. And you may have noticed it changed slightly over in our composition view. So let's return to the effects control panel for the Venus layer. And I'm just going to jack up the radius, maybe just a little bit more to give this really intense, cool kind of glow. And now the last thing I'm going to do, I don't like that this yellow solid is, well, just a yellow solid. If I temporarily increase the opacity of this layer again, and again, if you can't see this, if this layer is collapsed, you can again either expand it or press T on your keyboard to reveal the opacity. If I jack this up to 100, this is really just solid yellow and it doesn't look very nice. So let's come into the Effects and Presets panel and let's search for the Gradient Ramp effect. The Gradient Ramp effect lives under the Generate tab, and these are effects that will generate images or gradients or patterns for you. So you don't usually want to apply them to footage, like I wouldn't apply a gradient ramp to my Walter dance layer usually, because otherwise I'd lose my footage. Instead, these effects are usually applied to solid layers or adjustment layers, to which we'll get a little bit later. So let's take this Gradient Ramp effect and apply it to our yellow solid. And I might temporarily change the mode of this layer from screen back to normal. So this is what our yellow solid looks like. It's no longer a yellow solid. And in our effects controls, let's select the Gradient Ramp effect. And you may not have noticed one of the things that does happen with quite a few effects, they have additional settings and controls available in the preview window. For example, the Gradient Ramp effect has a start and an end point. And if you have this effect selected, in your preview window, you'll get these little markers that you can actually drag around, and these ones are part of the effect. If you don't have the Gradient Ramp effect selected, so if you just click in some empty space in the Effects Controls panel, those markers will vanish and you can't actually control them. So whenever you're tweaking an effect, make sure you select it in your Effects Controls panel, and let's just drag these around a little bit and define the gradient. So I'm going to pull this point down a little bit to have a really nice and smooth gradient over the entirety of my screen. And now in the Gradient Ramp settings, I'm going to change this over. So my end color is currently white at the bottom. Let's change that over to be yellow. So we're actually creating a gradient from yellow to black. Kind of just looks a little bit nicer. Maybe I'll pull this black one down just a little bit and the yellow one as well. And now let's change the mode from normal back over to screen. And it's actually looking a whole lot more interesting. Finally, let's lower the opacity of this layer back down to maybe about 17, 20 odd %. And so now this layer, if you temporarily disable the visibility, actually just adds a little bit of a yellow tint, like a yellow glow coming from the bottom, and it just looks a whole lot more interesting. Obviously, there's no right or wrong in what effects you may want to apply or how you want to tweak them or how you want your final effect to look. Just note that in the Effects and Presets panel, you have a huge number of different presets and effects and other things available that you can apply freely to any layer in your composition. And then come into the Effects Controls panel, make tweaks and changes, change the opacity of some of your layers to blend them all together into a final effect that you'll be happy with. Now, all of this, except for Walter dancing like a madman in the middle, is still pretty static. Therefore, in the next lesson, let's look at how we can add animation into our composition and to our effects.